kind of hello in my language, but Twant really means peace. Peace, my friends. My name is Ruchatneet. I'm from the Haudenosaunee, which most people know in English is the Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy. I'm Tuscarora, and as you can see by my medallion, I'm Turtle Clan. And so welcome. I feel like I'm maybe speaking to the choir a bit of why we're here, but I also think that creating relationships is important, and that's why we're here. So we're going to start off with what we do in our culture is we always start off with an opening, which is really to set the groundwork. The first thing we do is we bring our minds together as one to give thanks. And so we start with the people and we go all the way up to the stars. And some of our young people will talk more about that. But I just want to give you a sense of when I start off in our language that it's really to bring our hearts and minds together as one. And we do this whenever we meet for important things, to set our minds together. Yagwadi huatata ekwahewe wana jakwat digahrad. Yagwadi huatata ana ufne wana jakwat digahrad. Yagwadi huatata uharukwe wana jakwat digahrad. Yagwadi huatata uhyandisne ukwe wana jakwat digahrad. Yagwadi huatata awe wana jakwat digahrad. Yagwadi huatata ura agehatne wana jakwat digahrad. Yagwadi huatata gari ugehatne wana jakwat digahrad. Yagwadi huatata jitne gehaka wana jakwat digahrad. Yagwadi huatata hitak digariake wana jakwat digahrad. Yagwadi huatata hitne gehaka wana jakwat digahrad. Yagwadi huatata gusud athanyeha wana jakwat digahrad. Yagwadi huatata hita wana jakwat digahrad. Yagwadi huatata yukni sararawe wana jakwat digahrad. Yagwadi huatata rawat yatne wana jakwat digahrad. So the way we're gonna work today is we got quite a few people here that are gonna share with you. And so everyone's gonna introduce themselves as we go down. And then I'll say a few words at the end, and then we're gonna open it up for some questions at the end. So we have some young people here from the Haudenosaunee, and so they wanted to share some words with you.
Uju ginawa wabashki mesikwe Indigenous. Na ingin nindodam. The Jibwe Nindao, Minawa, Seneca, Tonawanda, Ejinakade. My name is Elsina Troyer, and I am 13 years old. I'm Tonawanda Seneca, and also Leech Lake Ojibwe, but I live in California. I decided to fly all the way here because I'm worried about our world. It is important to slow down climate change so we don't lose our resources like fish, trees, berries, animals, and plants. For instance, the pine forest on my reservation in Minnesota is dying, and scientists think the trees I love will no longer be able to grow there. New generations will probably live in a place our ancestors wouldn't recognize. I hear of pipelines threatening the lakes and rivers where wild rice grows. Wild rice is a food that is so important to our Ojibwe lifeways that it is a central part of the prophecies that led us westward hundreds and hundreds of years ago. To lose our wild rice would be a terrible blow to our very ways of life, our diet, and our culture. To help, I try to do things that are better for the environment. I walk to school instead of driving. I don't buy brand new clothes because the production of them is one of the main causes of climate change. The only meat I eat is hunted game, and I try to avoid plastic. I'm really small, and the things I do are small compared to how huge climate change is. However, climate change wasn't caused by just one person, so it can only be solved if a lot of people act to make a difference. In my Ojibwe religion, we are given just one instruction. It is to respect all of creation. There's something I want everyone to try to do today. Along with your own teachings, respect all creation. This includes the earth. It may mean walk to work, get a compost, or be vegetarian. To someone else, it could mean wear a jacket instead of using the heater, bike everywhere you can, or start a garden. Whatever it means to you, make a difference. If we work together, we can stop climate change. When I was 4 years old, I was in a ceremony. It was at a point where I was supposed to raise my hands up, like this, both hands up. But instead I held my hands like this. When they told me I had to open my hands, I said I couldn't, because I was a chipmunk. And this is what a chipmunk's hands are like. So they had to continue the ceremony with the little chipmunk. I've heard this story told many times. My family was delighted with my imagination and determination, though maybe not so much at the time of the ceremony itself. And yes, a lot of kids imagine themselves to be animals, but I think of this story now because it reminds me of how I've been taught to think about animals from both of my tribal traditions. Animals are no less important than humans. Humans are not more important than animals. So, I'm a chipmunk. You are all chipmunks. Animals are the same as us, just as are plants, insects, water, or the land itself. In fact, in our Haudenosaunee opening, the Thanksgiving address, we give thanks for life and the world around us, and we name and thank all the forces and beings of the natural and spiritual world. We thank each one: the earth, the waters, the fish, plants, animals, trees, birds, winds, thunderers, and the sun, moon, and the stars. Our greater society needs to adjust how we value life. We need to remember the very sacredness of it all. This is not a value that I see being practiced when I see oil and gas companies threatening the waters where our wild rice grows, or waters that we need to drink. This is not a value I see when Congress makes decisions that do not protect the earth, or banks support companies that actively hurt our earth. These big companies might not see what they do as harmful, or argue that it helps some people by giving them jobs more than it hurts others. But we are all related. We are all connected, as if we are all branches on one tree. If a tree sets one of its branches on fire to make room for another branch, it hurts the tree itself, doesn't it? We Indigenous people have a long history of being caretakers of the land and water. And around the world, most of the world's biodiversity remains in our lands. Losing that biodiversity in the rest of the world is heartbreaking and comes from attitudes that only look at the short term. I am proud that my tribes have traditions, beliefs, and agreements that protect the earth and promote cooperation between peoples, such as our one dish, one spoon ideal. And I want you to listen to us, to listen to the Indigenous peoples and our traditional teachings, and to work with us on solutions. But it goes farther than that. When I say value, as in value of life on this earth, something of value in terms of money. But that is a way of thinking that hurts us, that hurts the earth. We as children cannot tell you to stop making money. But I do want to tell you that your system is busted. Using up all our natural resources to make money and continuing to exploit the earth to make life better for a few and worse for the many is not sustainable. Of course, I know most of you here already know this, so I need you to talk to those who need to hear this. Talk to the oil companies, talk to the banks, the Congress, presidential candidates, and even climate deniers and Republicans. This is going to take a giant dramatic shift in how we approach this. Everyone should care that we are heading towards a doomsday, and no amount of money will protect anyone from the horrors of that. Humanity has to get back to a profound value system where we live and breathe a deep reverence for food, water, air, and the earth. That is what will save us. We can't keep setting our own branches in fire. We are all branches on the same tree. We are all chipmunks. Thank you.
Sego, Yodinalata Denyo Young Yats, Ogata Honi, Haudenosaunee, Dano, Oklahoma. Hello, my name is Peter Tide, Wolf Clan, and I'm an Akwesasne Mohawk. We are all here today so we can all agree that climate change is a grave situation. Some people operate under the belief that climate change is happening in other places and to other people. However, they think it will never affect them. However, climate change is here, it's happening, and it already affects all of us. Longhouse ceremonies follow the cycle of the seasons. Climate change is affecting those seasons, which in turn affects when we celebrate natural events. For example, the strawberry is the first fruit to ripen, and we give thanks in June. However, climate change will affect the time the strawberries ripen, affecting when we give thanks. This also affects the green bean, corn, and the maple trees. Akwesasne, which is home to many animals and plants, will no longer be hospitable habitat. Animals north as the temperatures gradually climb, and new animals and plants will migrate from warmer southern regions, completely changing the landscape of Akwesasne. The waters will change, which will affect the fish we eat. The St. Lawrence River will change, rising tides bring stronger currents, which will chip away at the riverbanks, changing the flow of the river. Weather will change, bringing long periods of precipitation and long periods of drought. Farming is also important in Akwesasne. What causes climate change? Emission of greenhouse gases is the largest contributor to climate change. Corporate farming is the mass production of single crops or animals. Often these corporate farms use genetically modified crops to increase yield, without considering effects on the surrounding land or how genetically modified crops will affect other plants and animals that are natural and native to the land. GMOs also affect native plants as well. The overproduction of a single crop does not give the land time to rest. The use of fossil fuels in everyday use, each small thing we do each day contributes to climate change. This includes small things like driving place to place and the electricity in your home. I feel as if some leaders do not acknowledge the full extent of the dumping of munitions and chemical waste or weapons, and it affects our marine life and water supply. Nations and corporations must take responsibility for their illegal disposal of radiological munitions. This allows for depletion of fish stocks and inability to reproduce. It is truly a silent killer as it raises the temperature of open waters. When pondering climate change, I turn to my traditional teachings, which helps provide focus. It leads me to think of traditional environmental knowledge, also known as tech. My vision is that tech and Western science can work hand in hand to address this issue. With this in mind, I look to the Two Row Wampum. The Two Row Wampum, historically a treaty between the Haudenosaunee people, between Haudenosaunee people and the Dutch. The white beads represent a river, and the purple beads represent canoes. The canoes will travel side by side down the river, each respecting each other's laws, religions, and way of life. It binds us as long as the grass is green, as long as the water runs downhill, and as long as the sun sets in the east and rises in the east and sets in the west, and as long as our Mother Earth will last. The respect that this treaty was founded upon cannot go much further if the ongoing issue of climate change continues. This is similar to the relationship between traditional environmental knowledge and Western science. This is why, on this one issue, our concerns must merge. We cannot continue in our own canoe any longer. Our Mother Earth is crying out and demanding our attention to make changes to the Earth, as she once cared for us and nurtured for us in the past. Ongwahua can no longer stay in their own canoe with the belief that non-Ongwahua will see these environmental problems and address them. Therefore, I issue a call to action. The U.S. government must know that Ongwahua are still here, and climate change is a huge issue for us. Our relationship with Mother Earth must be a symbiotic relationship. We cannot continue to take from her and disrespect Mother Earth without giving back and caring for her. The elders and adults have spoken for Mother Earth in the past, and now we should go to major venues and let our voices be heard. We should condemn companies that are responsible for greenhouse gases. We must focus our future on other forms of renewable energy that have less impact on the environment, such as hydropower and solar and wind energy. Global leaders need to dedicate time and effort to the protection and conservancy of our waters. We must do our best to fully eradicate the emitters that so deeply affect our waters. Until that time, while we are still considered the young people, it is our duty to leave here, learn all we can, and achieve good grades, and then at some point, the mantle will pass on to us, and we will use our knowledge to enact the change we need. Climate change discussions must take place more than one day, more than 1 week. Climate change must be the focus of all discussions for as long as Mother Earth will last.
I'm going to know what say that they what guy Indigenuity guest up. My name is Cassandra Minard. I am 24 years old. I am Eel Clan. I am from the Onondaga Nation, and my Unguhui name that was given to me as birth, Indigenuity, means little fire. My niece is here with me. So standing next to me. She's also from the Onondaga Nation. Onondaga Nation is the central part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which means when we have Grand Council, all title holders from other nations in the Confederacy come to Onondaga to meet. We come from a very traditional family. Our uncle is Sid Hill. He's a Ta'adaho of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Our Aunt Virginia Abrams is our Eel Clan mother, and our uncle Bench Johnson is our chief. We spent our childhood growing up in Longhouse and living our cultural ways. We grew up learning the value of giving thanks for every living thing, every living form that Mother Earth has given us. We knew that every living thing on Earth has a purpose as well as we do as human beings. When we finish eating any meal throughout the day, we always say Nyaweha, which means thank you. We say Nyaweha because we're giving thanks that we have food to eat and be able to have the energy to continue our day. When I was a kid, I spent all my time playing outside with my cousins on the nation at my Sodaha's house. We were always playing the greens behind the house, climbing the trees, or go to the creek where we put in the water in there. We played so much outside that our feet became rough that we could walk on the rocks with no problem. We were able to play with what Mother Earth gave us for entertainment. When we have Longhouse, it is based on the season. Our summers are always seasonal. We don't have a set schedule when these seasons will be. So our ceremonies are always seasonal. We don't have a set schedule when the ceremonies will be. We base it on when the beans, sap, strawberries, and corn are ready. And the reason why I'm here today is because if we don't start taking actual action on combat changes in the climate, then we will slowly lose our ceremonies. Like I said before, our ceremonies are based on seasons, and since the climate is rapidly changing, then our food seasonal schedule will be off, and that is not good. That food that we give thanks for will be off when to start growing and be off, which will put us behind giving thanks for them, which is our duty in our ceremonies to be giving that living form thanks. We had our bean ceremony delayed to the wet and cold spring. It is in our prophecies that the maple tree will start to die from the top down. The maple tree is the maple tree is the leader of the trees. Because of climate change, our crops have been late and we have had to delay our ceremonies. We have to care for our water that we drink to live, our plant that is our medicine food, the trees that give us oxygen, and the strawberries, which is our leader for all berries. Corn soup is a traditional meal that we also use in Longhouse, which we take home after we are finished. If we don't have the beans, and we don't have corn soup, which is our main source. Being here today is an honor, as well as having my niece by my side experience this with me. I am grateful to have the values and love that I have for our culture to be carried down to her so that she can make a bigger impact on the climate change than what I have planned to make a difference. I'm also grateful to be brought up to care and value our Mother Earth and all the things she has provided for us that we need. We have a huge community that acts like a family. When we're at Longhouse, we all help each other out if someone needs help passing out food, get an elder coffee, or even helping with kids or babies. This happens outside the Longhouse as well. For the ones who don't have the heart and destroying our planet, I ask you to put aside ego, selfishness, and greed to take care of our Mother Earth, so we can continue our ceremonies and have a future of the consistency of giving thanks for all living forms that we need to survive. Listen to us and learn. We cannot eat money nor drink oil. Let's start taking better care of our mother. I want to continue practicing my culture. Nyaweha.
Nyaweha Ungandena Nawawagate Seta, Jawata Gate Dani Sitingyasta. My name is Makiyah Lazore. I'm 14 years old from the Onondaga Nation. My Onondaga name is Demientieff. My family's traditional involvement with our culture has always pushed me to take care of our Mother Earth. I religiously attend our seasonal ceremonies throughout the year, which I'm very grateful that my school allows us to attend. Whenever it's time for ceremonies, I get excited. At the last midwinters, I made our traditional corn soup that we use the next day at ceremonies. At school, I realized students aren't taking our language seriously. The kids don't take the time nor realize how important it is to learn our language as well as understand what the words mean. In our ceremonies, we speak only in our language. Our speakers never use English. I want to encourage the boys to learn their Ungwihue language because they are the upcoming speakers and singers for our ceremonies. Our language is consistent of giving thanks for all living forms on our Mother Earth. When we do our openings, it gives thanks for the people, our Mother Earth, our medicines, the woodlands, the berries, the birds, the animals, the food, the winds, the thunders, the moon, the sun, the stars, the four messengers, and lastly, the Creator. Learning my language and understanding how important it is to give thanks for all living forms is what inspired me to take part in combat on climate change. We all need to realize that we should only take what we need. Every plant or animal has a purpose for where it lives. Don't kill animals or plants unless you need them. You should always give thanks every morning, night, or even when you pick plants. My opinion on what you can do to help stop environmental destruction is you can start with small things like recycling, stop using unnecessary products and objects. Don't keep your car running. Show your community the bad and how it's only getting worse if you don't stop. You can stop using plastic. Do not litter. Make groups to clean up your community. If you see someone doing bad, remind them about how that can affect things and tell them the right thing to do. We all need to come together and keep taking action for our future and our future generations. We as Indigenous people are here to stand up for our Mother Earth and use our voice to say we're still here and we're still fighting.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name's Eli, and I guess I'm a bit of an odd duck in this group because I'm from the west coast of Canada. But it's really wonderful to hear all of you speaking your language and the wise words that you have to share. So the word, and interestingly, the word Canada comes from the Haudenosaunee language. So and as you probably all know, contact between Indigenous peoples in North America and Europeans started in the south, in the east, and kind of spread northwest. So there was between 1492 and where first contact happened in my territory on the west coast of Vancouver Island was in the 1770s. I think it was 1776. So you're looking at 280 years between first contacts. It's kind of interesting when you think about it in those terms. And that first contact led to, I mean, there was certainly good times. There was some good times in the beginning, and when there was a balanced relationship. But in the, I guess, post-Confederation in 1867, and starting with probably the worst years of the Indian Act in 1885 to 1951, there was a 60-70 year period of very destructive relationship. And coming out of that, and it's, for me, it's notable that there was World War I and World War II happened within that same time frame. And Canada was industrializing rapidly in a global war effort, in a sort of a recrafting of world powers in post-industrial technological development and steam locomotive technology and such that really changed the way global economics happened. And so I think that local and Indigenous peoples really bore the worst part of that, that sort of race for global dominance. And so now the recovering starts. 35 years ago, today we're celebrating the 35-year anniversary of the Mears Island Tribal Park. My uncle Moses Martin was our elected chief councillor in 1984. He's our elected chief councillor today. We're Tla'amin, Nuu-Chah-Nulth peoples from the West Coast. And 35 years ago, Moses got word from somebody who worked for the logging company that went AWOL. And this guy, I don't know where he's from, but his job was to be a survey worker, and he was there on the ground before any of the destruction happened. And he saw how beautiful these places were, the ancient cedar rainforests of the West Coast. And it was his work to lay out roads and cut blocks. These thousands-year-old trees, beautiful temperate ancient cedar rainforest. And then he saw the destruction that happened from the clear-cut logging, and he had to go back and he had to see that. And so I think when human beings participate in that kind of destruction, I think something breaks inside of us. Whether it's industrial agriculture, treating pigs like they're non-sentient beings, or whether it's destroying a 1,000-year-old ecosystem, I think it fractures something in our humanity, and it disturbs our interhuman relationships as well. Substance abuse, these big boom industries bring social degradation. They bring prostitution, gambling, substance abuse, domestic violence against children, and so is this really a benefit to society? I don't know. I know it's not a benefit to society. It's certainly not a benefit to the ecosystem. And so this guy went AWOL, and he went and he stole, or he snuck away copies of the drawings, and he showed my Uncle Moses where they were going to start logging on Mears Island 35 years ago. And Moses received that information, and at first he was upset, he was angry, he was afraid. These are a lot of the same feelings that we're feeling today in the climate crisis. A sense of hope, of disempowerment, insecurity. And in our teachings, all of those emotions and feelings are good to have. They're healthy, they're medicine. They're part of the language that Creator gave to us to understand the world and to understand ourselves. But the other teaching there in humanity is to not get stuck. And to don't act from a place of fear or anger. And so what he did is he took those feelings and that information that he had received from this logger, and he went into an Usam ceremony. And we use water to understand, to process those feelings and those emotions. And what Moses came out of that ceremony with was compassion and love and understanding. And understanding why the human beings, the people who work for that logging company, they themselves are not evil or inherently bad. They are employed by a company which has received permits in what they all believe is a legitimate industry, a legitimate way to make livelihood. And so in the Nuu-Chah-Nulth culture, when somebody is acting in a self-destructive way, like if you meet somebody who's starving, and someone who's very hungry who doesn't know where the next meal is coming from may act in a destructive way to others or a destructive way to themselves. And it's the same thing with teachings. If somebody is malnourished in teachings, they could be destructive to others or to themselves. And if you have extra food, or if you have the teachings to share, you have a moral obligation to share those things. And so what Moses did 35 years ago is he knew where they were going to land their boats to offload equipment for road construction. And he went there and he started to prepare a welcoming meal for these loggers, to welcome them and to share a meal together, and to educate them about that place. They had been told that is Tree Farm License 47 or Tree Farm License 56. But the name of that place is Nuu-Chah-Nulth. And so I really want to share the story that Moses, of his actions, because he was able to stand up in a good way and to act from a place of understanding and compassion. And so 35 years later, those trees are still standing. And as I got the 2-minute note there, I'll just wind up here to say that the one thing that my elders from the Namaya Valley said, that we don't need to fight climate change. That's what the elders said. They said, our mother is cleansing herself. She's cleansing herself with floods and smudging herself with fires. She's not punishing us. She's correcting us with a firm but loving hand. And we don't need to fight our mother. We need to learn to respect her and work with her. That all minutes? And then lastly, with my last seconds, I'll say we need to fundamentally reimagine and repatriate the word economy. It's gone far away from its true meaning. Look at the word ecology, ecosystem, and economy. These share a common root in an old language. And oikos, economy is the wise and prudent management of the house. And I was talking to these students earlier today about consent. And we need to imagine innovative models of economic development. So it's not about what we're against, and this is what Moses really made clear to me. He says you have to know your boundaries and you have to know what you're against, but you have to be even more clear and passionate and powerful about what you want. Thank you. Kleko, kleko.
Sisters here share a song for you, and sometimes these talks can get more heavy, so we like to mix other things in there, help keep our minds fresh.
Hello, thank you for having me today. My name is Blaney. I'm from the Tla'Amin Nation on the Pacific Northwest Coast. I'm just really grateful to see Indigenous youth voices present today. As an Indigenous youth, we are born into the front lines of climate change. Our territories are ground zero for extraction, for climate impact, the effects of which are felt not only within our generation, but first and foremost on our territories. So our involvement in climate activism is a continuum of the work that our ancestors started. Our climate activism started at first contact in 1492 with our ancestors' resistance to extractive industry, to land degradation and destruction of everything that we know to be sacred. I'm going to share a song, Fly Go Fly. It's a Lummi Shaker song, and I sing this many places also as an honor song for missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is something that needs to be addressed within climate change discussions, because where you have areas of construction, points of extraction, you have man camps, you have an increase of violence against Indigenous women, murders of Indigenous women. And that's what we talk about when we're talking about climate change. We're talking about very real impacts within our communities. We're talking about our relatives going missing. We're talking about our families not being able to feed themselves. So we need to not just think about, like when this will impact us. We need to address that this is about immediate survival for Indigenous communities.
Oh
flies that high. Fly, eagle, fly high, soar through the sky. Way out here, oh, oh, way, oh, way. Way out here, oh, oh, way, oh, way. Way out here, oh, way, oh, way. Way out here, oh, way, oh, way. Way out here, oh, oh, way, oh, way. Way out here, oh, oh, way, way. You are the only one that flies that high. Fly, eagle, fly high, soar through the sky. Way out here, oh, oh, way, oh, way. Way out here, oh, oh, way, oh, way. Way out here, oh, way, oh, way. Way out here, oh, way, oh, way. Way out here, oh, oh, way, way. Way out here, oh, oh, way. Church Elfish.
Chwant Oskanaha, gath agutiad is gisa saita di red socks. What ni gonna harata Tla'Amin is kaya kunapta Rakwana Royana kaya riwayane. Greetings, as my brother Ruchatneet pointed out, we're happy that your piece is still here, and just wanted to provide a real short explanation or summary of our trip here to New York, and some of the themes we've been hearing from our speakers from Nuu-Chah-Nulth, what we'll hear from Gwich'in territory, right here on Lenape territory too. So we recognize and honor the current and future ancestors of the Lenape people whose territory we are on. One of the things that's been a theme through here is something that was mentioned earlier, and that's an old cultural teaching we have in Haudenosaunee country called the dish with one spoon. The dishes basically explain in our cultures every part of the natural world is contained in a bowl. And our teaching was a long time ago is that what we were to do with that bowl is to pass it around and eat it with one spoon. And so all of our ceremonies, all of our language, all of our teachings, all of our songs that were shared today are part of that dish. And in fact, for Ngwehoe people, as we talk about as the people, this is really the first natural resource policy we have on Turtle Island for Haudenosaunee people. It was a policy that we shared with the Anishinaabe, our neighbors, about how we were to share in the land. And it's a model for sustainability. It's a question we often ask ourselves when we're passing out that corn soup in ceremonies. How big is our spoon? What are we doing with our spoon? Are we taking? Are we putting back into that dish? Are we sharing with others? And these teachings are really part of why we brought our youth here from Haudenosaunee country to join in the march on Friday to be with other young people on the streets of New York. It's the reason why we visited the United Nations yesterday. And they had a chance to see from all the indigenous people across the world the issues that are so common to indigenous people. And this is a very old story for Haudenosaunee people. Some of the students here may not know that Haudenosaunee people were some of the first people who went to the League of Nations back in the 1920s, who brought our cases in front of the World Forum to talk about movement across borders that were placed on our territory, to talk about our right of citizenship to our own countries. And so this is a relived experience we just had over the past few days. And some of you may be wondering, well, what's this indigenuity, which is the title of this session, I think. And this is a term that was probably coined by Daniel Wildcat at Haskell University. He claims that he did not make this term up, but I think he actually did. And it's a combination of both indigenous and ingenuity, right? So what is the ingenuity within indigenous culture that sends us a message about how to move forward? In our ceremonies, as our young people point out, one of the primary responsibilities we have is to give thanks. And Ruchatneet opened us up today with using this root word of not only thanksgiving or to be thankful for. In our language, in our worldview, it's the same word, and the root word is the same as to greet. So in our way of thinking, our first responsibility is to give thanks. And for Haudenosaunee people, it's very interesting, we have no concepts of hope or faith. And I think that's what's happening a lot within the world culture today, is this hope that somebody else will take this on, this faith that there will be some silver bullet to resolve the climate crisis. But when we get together amongst each other, we have no concept of that we're asking for something. What we were doing is actually just being grateful for what was put here in front of us. And that's all our obligation is, that's our duty, right? Every animal, the eagle that was mentioned, every insect, every piece of fungus has a responsibility, has a duty. And for human beings, it's our duty to give thanks, because everything we need is here. We have no need to ask for anything more. And so we have no word or concepts in our culture for hope or faith. So one of the things as we move on to our Gwich'in guest here on Lenape territory, is to think about what cultural paradigms settlers have in North America. What are the frameworks that we will use going forward together, like the Two Row Wampum? We see this now in the academy. I work at a university in upstate New York, and there's tons of non-Indigenous people asking us all these questions about what do we do? What's our next move, Neil? And every single time we have to start with those cultural frameworks about how we think about the world. We talk about one dish and one spoon. We also talk about the Two Row Wampum. And it's a great metaphor that Peter mentioned, that this traditional or indigenous knowledge systems working in our canoe live together in peace and friendship and trust with Western science on that river of life. And so indigenuity is nothing new, right? We have all that we have right in front of us. We have all these teachings, these frameworks. And so our question is always, what are the cultural paradigms and frameworks of the ship? What are the teachings from Western science that tell us how to move down that river of life? And this is something I'd like to return to for the audience to think about, is what are those paradigms? What are those frameworks that allow us to look at humans as being part of the natural world but not separate, and moving down that river of life? So,
Bernadette Demientieff, Gwich'yaa. My name is Bernadette Demientieff, and I am from Fort Yukon, Alaska. I just want to acknowledge that we're on the Lenape territory, just as a Gwich'in visitor. That's just something that we always do to show respect. I want to tell you, from me, I promise to go home and I promise to do better. I know I'm always doing a lot of talking, but I'm not walking my talk, and I promise to you that I will do more to try to help to secure your future. In Alaska right now, I'm emotional, I'm sorry, because it's a real honor to sit up here with them and just to have our youth speaking out. It's important, and we have to listen. In Alaska, I'm from a tribe, one of the historical tribes called the Quicken Nation, and we represent 14 communities throughout Alaska and Canada, and we have a spiritual and cultural connection to a porcupine caribou herd. The porcupine caribou herd got their name because of the river that they migrate on. Their wintering grounds are in Canada, and their calving grounds, where they travel 1,500 miles every April to go up, and they have up to 40,000 calves in a 2-week period. We migrated with them. Our territory and the porcupine caribou herd are identical. The only thing is we would not step foot into the calving grounds. That's sacred land to us. In 2017, it was just open to oil and gas development. The rest of Alaska is pretty much open to oil and gas development. This is the remaining 5%. This is where they've been going for thousands of years. And the Gwich'in tribe, for the first gathering that was held in over 150 years, was in 1988. My elders and chiefs gathered from the Canadian and Alaskan side, and they gave us 3 directions. They told us to go out and tell the world that we're here, to do it in a good way, and don't compromise our position. But that was dealing with oil and gas development, but we're also dealing with climate change now. We have 33 coastal communities that are falling into the ocean. We have ticks. We have dead birds literally falling out of the sky. We have our lakes and our rivers with dead fish floating when we don't know what's causing it. And on top of that, our elected leadership is not mentioning this on the platform that they have. So I'm being forced to come down and share, and it's hard, because I always thought that we're ground zero, but we're all ground zero. Our way of life, our land, our animals, it's interconnected to who we are as Indigenous people. We are impacted, we are affected, and we need help. The Gwich'in, we've been doing this fight for over 40 years, and we just organized our first Gwich'in youth council, and we've done that because the coastal plain, the calving grounds, has resources underneath it, and I'm afraid that it's not going to end with me. We're not going to permanently protect it. So we're having to educate our younger generation, because this is always going to be an issue. So it's just time that Indigenous people start being respected. One of our creation stories also is that our sacred land will be disturbed, and that the people that done that to us are going to come and ask for our help, and we have to help them. And that's frustrating, because We're trying to tell you now. So, it's just important that we do more. Climate change is here. We're all feeling it. We're dealing with the flooding, the tornadoes, the hurricanes. Hurricanes that are coming, they're supposed to be like 100 years apart. They're coming months apart. We have the flooding, fires. We have record fires in Alaska. I couldn't leave my house for 3 days. I'm worried about my children's future. I have 5 grandchildren, and I'm worried about their future. Coming down here, it gives me hope because I see all of you and I see our younger generation, but we can't leave it up to them. I said that yesterday and I'm saying it again. We have to do more. This is our mess that we made. We can't leave it on the backs of our youth. So Makiyah, thank you.
To all of our presenters here. So back when I was 23 is when I really had like a spiritual awakening. And I felt like I was too young. I wanted the 50-year-olds, the 60-year-olds to step up. And I was angry. It's like, why is the Creator pushing me at this age? But in reality, it was a gift. It was a gift for me. It changed the direction of my life. It really began to open up myself to the healing that I needed to go through. I see my community breaking down. We were in a civil war over gambling, which we were able to turn back as our traditional teachings had instructed us. And at the time, I didn't realize that what was happening was I was being broke open. And I think probably most of you in this room had to be broke open at some point in your life for you to be in this room right now. And some of our young people are just being broken open younger because they feel the urgency of what's going on around us. And so, I grew up in a household, which many of you probably had, where my great-grandparents were all raised in Native boarding schools. And so we didn't really know how to treat each other. We didn't know how to nurture each other, hug each other. And so that's where I had to start with. I had an elder that I was working with, and the first thing he asked me to do was, can you give your parents a hug and tell them you love them? And I don't remember my father ever hugging me growing up or telling me he loved me. And probably before 10 years old is when I had last remembered my mother hugging me and telling me that. So when I gave them each a hug and told them I loved them, my mother just said it right back immediately. It took about 6 months for my father to start telling me that he loved me back. But I felt like that was like my ground zero to start coming back. It's like we can't treat the earth better than we treat ourselves. And if we're not really loving ourselves and respecting ourselves, then we can't compartmentalize that in our life. You can't compartmentalize how you treat one area of your life from another, because it's all going to bleed over into everything. And so that's been a lot of my work, is really learning to love myself more. And it's been a challenge. I started as a film major recently just because, I did a documentary on boarding schools, and it reached over 250,000 people. So we can go out and we can talk and we can share, but really I just felt like that was a stronger way to get our message out. And so what I found was in film history is that between the early 1915, the first major film done in the United States, first feature film was called The Squaw Man by Cecil B. DeMille. And for the next, till 1967, the major genre of film was Westerns, which perpetuated the stereotype of Native Americans in relationship to early settlers. And the US had a stranglehold on the film industry after World War I. And so that stereotype went out around the world. And not only that stereotype, but the stereotype of African Americans, the stereotype of Chinese, all of those things that were coming out during that period just affected the consciousness of the whole world. But as a young Native person growing up, that's what I seen, and a lot of our people seen, were those stereotype fictional films. They're not nonfiction, they're fictional, with a certain storyline that tried to define us as a people. And so we had a conference with the Nature Conservancy a while back, and I talked about the invisibility of Indigenous people. It was a survival mechanism for us to be invisible. If we spoke out too much, we were in the crosshairs, you might say. And so it became a survival. And it became a survival mechanism for me, even in education. It's like I want it to be invisible. But we can't be invisible anymore. It's not the time for invisibility. We have to come forward. And there's a lot of our community members that aren't here that would have a hard time being up here right now. But we have to step up. And I see a lot of, the women, I think you can relate to that, of having been kind of relatively invisible for a long time, along with Indigenous people, a lot of marginalized people. And I think we all have to step up and get out of our comfort zones and challenge ourselves to put ourselves out there more. So we've heard a lot about this Two Row Wampum, and I just wanted to share a little bit. So the Two Row Wampum, as one of our young people talked about, was an agreement originally by the Haudenosaunee and the Dutch about staying in our own canoes, staying in our canoe and their ship, and that we wouldn't cross into each other's affairs, basically. And I think it's important on certain levels that we respect each other. And in our ships, we still have traditional chiefs in several of our communities. And so I seen this vision, or was shared this vision of, so we live 15 minutes from Niagara Falls. That's where our current community is. And I feel like where we're at now is we have two ships that are heading towards this falls. And in this effort, we have to get into one ship, one canoe, if we're gonna survive. And I really think that that's what Spirit is pushing us for, is how can we work together? How can we get in sync with each other and work on a level of cooperation to help so that our young people and our grandchildren and what we call those faces that are still looking up, that are still yet to come, that they will have a place here when they come. And so I think that was one of the things when we had met early on with our group of how are we able to work together. And so this was, I'm just gonna read you just a few sentences. This is a communique that we put out from the Traditional Circle of Indian Knowledge and Youth, which has been meeting, well, we began consistently meeting since 1977, but even prior to that, we would meet on occasion, but after that, we met yearly. And this was, I'll give Oren Lyons credit on this, he's also part of that circle, but it's a communique that we all agreed to. But in the end, it says, so the great peacemaker at the founding of the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy, well over 1,000 years ago, here in Turtle Island, North America, instructed our leaders to never take hope from the people. So it is today we carry the message of peace, equity, and the power of the good minds, united, the ancient instruction of one dish and one spoon, to share and work for the coming generations, so that 7 generations from now, people will have what we have today. That directive has never been more relevant than it is today. Our message of peace, sharing, and equity for all humanity requires that requires that the current values driving industrial corporations and nation states of wealth accrued by greed, slave labor, and unrestrained decimation of the earth's finite resources cease now. One would ask, what is the reality of that? That is the open question. The will and spiritual unification of the world's peoples have the power to bring change. Value change for survival. Now, peace, a future for coming generations. And so I'm just going to close with that. And we're going to move on to some time. I'm not sure how much time we have left. But opening it up to any questions or any comments that anybody in the audience has. And we have some mics too. Ask any questions.
I don't know how to really ask this question. I think it's everything that's been said, and I would bet that everybody in this room agrees with, and we know we have to be together, but fighting the monsters of oil and coal and money capitalism is not an easy task. And we can say we want to be together, but I really think we need real strategies about how to deal with these really huge monsters that are destroying our earth. And I wonder, open that up.
Is this one? I guess this one. Yeah, I don't think there's a quick, easy answer to that. But it reminds me of something that the elders talked to me about up in northeastern British Columbia. They have a lot of oil and gas development there. And they're saying that oil itself is not a evil thing. We have to understand that oil and coal and all these so-called fossil fuels are the residue of all life on Earth. It's the collective ancestors of all living things that are alive today is in that substance, and it exists in this world, and is equally worthy of respect. And so I think a paradigm shift is needed for these things, because we still have the mindset of disconnectedness that humanity is separate from nature, and so I think it's a paradigm shift. I think, and paradigm shift happens in a moment. We need to find ways to create opportunities for those paradigm shifts to happen. And like the gentleman was saying about filmmaking, I think through the arts is one way. You can have all the textbooks and all my community calls it $50 words. All that stuff is important for sure. But through aesthetic education, we can change the minds and hearts of people. And recognizing that those actors that are behind the monsters, they're suffering differently, but they're also suffering. So that's a hard pill to swallow, you know. I think back to King during the Civil Rights Movement. Martin Luther King talked about how the master-slave relationship is just as unhealthy and destructive to the master as it is to the slave. And there's that's a really hard pill to swallow. It's really hard to get your mind wrapped around that, but that came into full focus for me up in Canada in October of 2014. There was a retired RCMP officer who had participated in the 1960s and 50s. One afternoon of his job as a police officer was to forcibly remove a child from an Indigenous family and take that child to a boarding school, or what we call residential school. And he was just following orders at the time. It was chain of command, and this was his orders to go and remove this child. And he kind of buried that in his psyche for 40, 50 years, or however long it was. And when he was retired and he was going to church, and he, at the time, you know, the church was recognizing that residential schools was not Christian. It wasn't a very Christian thing to do, and it was bad. And that the church had participated in that with the government. And so he started to slowly deteriorate mentally. First he couldn't go out in public, and then gradually his anxiety grew into a full-blown breakdown. And he went to go see a doctor, and the doctor said, "You need to see a psychologist." And the psychologist helped him to understand that what he was experiencing was this trauma that he had participated in. Imagine going into somebody's house and taking a child, mom screaming, you know, the kids crying, and everyone's upset, you know, and in that scene, he's the bad guy, right? But he was damaged in that experience as well. And so what he did is he got advice to go to the local friendship center where he was living in Canada. And there was a healing circle of elders, of Indigenous elders who had survived residential schools. And he went and he shared his story about what he had done and how that was later affecting him. And they did not hesitate for even a minute. They fully embraced him into their healing journey. And that is, you know, for me, it just stays with me as one of the most beautiful stories. And they're still together sharing on that healing journey today. So that's my rant in response to your question.
I'd like to say something. So in Alaska, we also have a lot of oil and gas development, and we have family members that are working in the oil field. Some of them don't have a choice, but they are being, I think it's a lot to do with education, right? We need to share with them what they're doing to our land and what they're doing to Mother Earth. My son, for instance, he went up to Prudhoe Bay and he left work. He was hired and he left because he saw this sick caribou. And he came back and he's like, "Mom," he's like, "you gotta do something for them." So we just have to let them know what they're doing. Up there we have a lot of differences. You know, there's native corporations and then there's tribes. And some people, they depend on the resources underneath, and tribal, Indigenous, our resources are what's on top, right? The water, the healthy animals. And so I think reaching out and educating them on what they're actually doing to not just Mother Earth, but to people that live in these areas would also be a really good way to do it. We have to be kind, compassionate people, right? We have to respect other people, especially when they are the people of that land. We can't just go in there and do whatever we want because we need the money or we need that resource. we have to be respectful, kind, compassionate human beings. So, thank you.
I just wanted to add one other thing to that is one thing, and I think Eli brought it up, was how do we do something from a loving place? And when I traveled with Tadadaho, he would always say there's nothing more powerful than gentleness. And so what I've found in my own life is that that the Creator always creates a path if we're really paying attention. And part of that is, and I like to say the saying is, tilling where the soil is fertile. So the gas corporations might not be ready to listen, but it still doesn't mean we don't try to send them a message in some way. But most of our work is how do we encourage those where the soil is fertile. And a lot of them is like these young people. There's people in our community where that soil is fertile. And so looking for those areas where we can begin to plant the seeds to, because I really do believe that it's going to take a consciousness shift. And I think it's being really underrepresented in the news of how significant that culture shift is going on, because the news isn't in business to do that. So we just keep moving forward and know that that it's those little things of reaching out to those that are in our circles of influence that we have around us, and continue to lead by our own example of how we're living our life, and that we don't overwhelm ourselves, because it's all these little steps that create the big, huge steps. And so we can't get caught up on the big, huge step. We got to focus on the little steps, and the big steps will just happen on their own. And so that's what I felt when you were saying that, is sometimes we get ahead of ourselves and we start to overwhelm ourselves with how do I get to the big step when there's all these little steps that we can take in our everyday life to get us there.
Hey, I'm from Gwich'in territory on the west coast. I just accompanying my friend here. I wasn't planning on speaking, but I do live at a community that's like at the front line of oil and gas in many ways, with our southern neighbors of the Lazore. And some of you may have heard about what's been going on our territories with like an actual invasion by an oil and gas company. And that, what they're doing out there is how I view that. That is how you do it. We're not fighting back against an oil company. We're trying to exist as we always have, and we are doing that. But we're also being criminalized for it, and we're not being supported in the same way that people are. I'm not sure how to even explain this, but if you want to, people always talk about first contact, right? I seen first contact earlier this year when they came and removed us from the territory with assault rifles. So that is first contact happening all the time out there, because we've never given up an inch of our territory. We're not Canadians, we're not British Columbia or whatever it is. We're Gwich'in, Lazore, and that's what's happening every day, is that we're criminalized and our lives are threatened for trying to stand up against corporations who are trying to come at our territories. So that's just something I want to share, is that there are people out here doing that work, right? And there's always this thing, especially in spaces of Indigenous people speaking to mostly Shua or like non-Indigenous people, this sort of narrative that comes up that Indigenous people are going to save us all, right? That happens, everyone, you always hear that. It's like, we have all the knowledge, we're going to save you all. But when we're doing this, it's not to save you all, it's to keep up our way of life, but it is also for you. So what you can do is try to follow our lead and support people who are taking those stands, right? Okay, yeah, it's just like, yeah, that's all I have to say, right?
Thank you so much for saying that, and just kind of want to follow up that statement with just a question about the role of like direct action in this movement to save our planet, and support and continue Indigenous folks' ways of life and land. And I know you've been doing that. You've been blockading people trying to come into your land, and I just wonder from the rest of the panel what you see of the role, movements like I Don't Know More, Standing Rock, and how non-Native folks can support those movements, and how you see the role of those tactics moving forward.
Yeah, I had mentioned my Uncle Moses in 1984. That welcome dinner was a blockade. And the cabin where they wanted to build a road, and like a sauna. There was good times. It was like the tail end of the hippie age. There's make love, not war kind of stuff going on. And there was Indigenous people and Nuu-Chah-Nulth people camped out there together for a long time to show that solidarity. And I think that if it were just the hippies, like my mom was a flower child from the prairies, a farm girl, cultural movement, and she ended up on the West Coast. Many draft dodgers from the Vietnam War, whatnot, ended up out on the West Coast. And I think if it was just the hippies who tried to stop it, I think it would have failed. And I think if it was just the Nuu-Chah-Nulth people trying to stop it, I think it would have probably failed. But together, we worked together to do that. Shared values. And so there's a role for direct action for sure. And right up until 1993, the War in the Woods, where it was the largest civil disobedience in the history of Canada before the G20 riots or protests in Toronto. And one thing that Moses really embedded in me, and this is what he went into that ceremony, was Iisaak. That yes, he was angry, he was upset, and there was all those emotions, but in ceremony he created the right posture and how he could stand on those blockades in a respectful way. And I think that's why he was successful, because he didn't stand there and yell at the loggers, you get the hell out of here or something. He welcomed them and embraced them in our teachings. And it's not easy to do. There was death threats, and in 1984, there was a lot less cell phone cameras and such. There was a lot less exposure. There was attempts on his life, and others who stood on those blockades. And today, there's people dying in different places. But the one thing that Moses made sure to tell me when I started doing this work was, yes, it's clear, we get those teachings from the mother bear about boundaries, but it's equally important to be passionate about what we want as an alternative. So we're not just anti-development, so to speak, but we have another vision, another way of creating livelihoods and so-called, economic prosperity in the true sense of the word economy.
Yeah, I'd like to also talk to you. So, where are you? So I can talk to you? Basically, okay. I actually had that question yesterday when we were in Nine Nations. When she spoke, I said to Neil, I said, so how are we going to show our Haudenosaunee ways to these people so they can follow us? I know there's some ceremonies that are sacred to us that we cannot share, but I know there's our traditional ways, our cultural ways that we can share with you guys, and hopefully we can bring it to a broadcasting kind of way. Social media, we could use that, make a platform for us so you guys can follow the guidelines that we follow every day. I know some of our people from our nation went up to Standing Rock and stood with them. They actually brought lacrosse with them to play. It's for entertainment, for a creator, and it was another way of something that's going on, it's bad, we could still have good time with each other. But right now I am thinking of ways after today and after this weekend, I'm actually gonna work with Neil to find a way so everyone, non-natives and outsiders, can understand and follow our ways so we can make a better earth, a better community, and unite as one. But that is definitely I want to work on, is something like that, so everyone around here and everyone here and everyone around here that's been here this weekend, we can follow our values and do that. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, I just also want to piggyback off of that. Understand that we're Indigenous people, but we're different right? We have different values, but we all respect Mother Earth, we all respect our waters and our animals, but we do have different upbringings. And so just learning, not confusing, and maybe connecting. We have a lot of people that have come up to Alaska and Canada and connect with us and learn and actually understand why we stand up against oil and gas development. It's a human rights violation. It's food security. It's our identity is not up for negotiation. And so just learn, just like we're all here together, and we also are learning from each other. And so but we are working on ways you can definitely just learn, reach out and just connect with us. That's the best way.
In order to truly combat climate change, we first have to reverse the effects of it. And I think you asked how a non-Indigenous person could help contribute to that. The United States and Canadian governments have a long history of not listening to Indigenous people. So if you want to help us make our voices be heard, you could contact maybe your local or national government and tell them to condemn companies that have contributed to this oil.
We're kind of closing in now. We're in the last 5 minutes of our panel here, and I appreciate all of you coming and sharing with us today and having the interest to be here. I think as was brought out, if you're looking, like when my young brother here talked about action, I think that people get called from within themselves. If they're being called to that action, then do it. I think every time when I look back on when our community went through turmoil, I can look back and also be kind of thankful for it, because it woke me up. And all of these altercations that we're having are waking people up. And they're all serving a purpose. I'm sure your community is waking up with what they're having to deal with right now in ways that they didn't in 20 years or in 100 years. And it's the time for us to wake up. And it doesn't always feel good. We burned a fire for 2 years straight that never went out, and we protested nonviolently every day. And our biggest challenge was the state government, because they supported economic development. And so they looked at us like we were the ones that were the bad person for trying to push it back. And so, but we held our ground, and we just non-violently every day just stood in there and just took whatever they were throwing at us, and the next day would just show up again until we were able to turn it back. And I'm not saying every situation is going to work out that way. It may not. But people will wake up in the process. And I think that now's the time for people to get motivated and move off the fence. And I'm sure many of you are already motivated, but it's really, I really feel like the Creator is always pushing for the best situation, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time. It doesn't feel good sometimes, but I think when we look back, sometimes it's the vision is 2020 of why it needed to happen that way. As hard as it feels at the time. But action is important. So I was just gonna, what we do, we have about a minute left, and what we really like to do is we like to close it up with a closing as well. It's like bookends, and really it's really about leaving ourselves here with a good mind, And so that's one thing I just wanted to point out as well, is that that to put our thoughts in thankfulness each day. And when we're feeling disheartened or we're feeling down, think about what we have to be grateful for. Because that's really what's creating, is keeping our thoughts in that place as well. Because there's always things to be grateful for, no matter what's happening around us. And that'll help keep us stronger. Yagwadi huatata ikwahewe wana jakwat digera. Yagwadi huatata ana ufne wana jakwat digera. Yagwadi huatata we said disne uharukwe wana jakwat digera. Yagwadi huatata uhia disne ukwe wana jakwat digera. Yagwadi huatata awe wana jakwat digera. Yagwadi huatata ure egehane wana jakwat digera. Yagwadi huatata gari ugehane wana jakwat digera. Yagwadi huatata jin egehaka wana jakwat digera. Yagwadi huatata hitak digariake wana jakwat digera. Yagwadi huatata hinegehaka wana jakwat digera. Yagwadi huatata gusur atanyaha wana jakwat digera. Yagwadi huatata hite wana jakwat digera. Yagwadi huatata yunit zera rawe wana jakwat digera. Yagwadi huatata rawat yatne wana jakwat digera. Thank you, everybody.
Just a very quick announcement about an event that's happening tomorrow as well. Just really quickly before everyone departs. There's going to be a panel centering Indigenous youth voices in climate justice. I'm going to be on it, and Zolohi, as well as another friend of ours who came from Unistoten and has a lot of perspectives on front lines and Indigenous youth resistance on front lines. The address is 40 West 20th Street.